Welcome back to another preview of the 2024 race season. Today, we're going over Saudi Arabia. We're your Turn 1 hosts, Jeremiah and Thomas. Thomas, I'm going to dive into last year's race a little bit, if you don't mind.
Let's go.
So, last year, we had an interesting start to the race because, off the bat, Charles Leclerc has to take an engine component or electronical control component. Regardless, he has a 10 place grid penalty. He's starting in 12th, even though he qualified in second, which is rough. Also, you'll notice that Max Verstappen is nowhere to be found in the top 10. That's because he's starting 15th. He had an awesome time set in Q1, had the fastest time, but then going into Q2, he has a drive shaft problem. That's going to take him all the way to 15th. That was rough, but it's cool because it's kind of, so check this out. Lewis Hamilton starting in 8th. You've got, or I guess 7th because of Charles Leclerc. Then you got Charles Leclerc starting in 12th. Max Verstappen starting in 15th. So really your heavy hitters are nearing the back, and you kind of spend this entire race watching their climb back up to the front of the grid. Slowly but surely, Max Verstappen is catching Charles Leclerc, but Charles Leclerc is going to maneuver his way up the field all the way to about 5th, 6th. Doesn't finish the race there. He finishes down at 7th as Max finally gets past him. But there's a bunch of different chaos that happens in between that. You have Lance Stroll having engine problems. They tell him to pull the car over and shut it down. He's done. Alex Albon has braking problems. He's done. And even nearing the race, as you get to around lap 35 towards the end of the race, you have Sergio Perez has a long brake pedal problem, which I still don't remember exactly what that is. However, he was fine. He was still able to finish in first. And then Max Verstappen started to get a weird drive shaft whining that he kept going back and forth as his engineers about. They couldn't figure it out. They kept asking for feedback. He just kept repeating the same things over and over again. Ultimately, it didn't hinder his race. He finishes second. And Fernando Alonso finishes third. Kind of. Here's where it gets weird. So first of all, Fernando Alonso is given a penalty of 5 seconds starting off just because whenever he lines up to the outside of the grid box. That was a weird thing. And then he has some other problems later on. I think you have a little bit more information on it if you want to tack into that a little bit.
Yeah, so the big news out of last year, outside of Max not winning, which at the time we didn't really know how dominant of a season it was going to be, right? Like it was the second race. So the biggest news was the two Aston Martin cars. And real quick, I'll hit, Lance Stroll retired 16 laps in, and that was after a dominant performance the race prior in Bahrain for Aston Martin. So big points losses for Aston Martin early in the season when they had a really competitive car. But then you're right, you look up at the grid at Fernando Alonso, he finishes the race, okay? So he crosses the line in third place. But if you watch the last couple of laps again, you'll remember that Mercedes was vying to try to get him a penalty for his penalty. So he got the original penalty for lining up incorrectly. But when he served that penalty, there was question if he served it correctly because he served it in one of the pit stops. And if you're familiar with F1 penalties, you know that if you serve a penalty incorrectly, you usually get another penalty tacked on, and it's usually a harsher penalty than the first one. They kind of scale up in time. And so they came on the radio and they thought that they might be assessed a 5-second penalty or a 10-second penalty. So Fernando actually bumped his lead out over George Russell to over 5 seconds. If you look at the race classifications for last year, he was over 5 seconds ahead of him. But the stewards came out after the race, gave him like a 10-second penalty, which pushed him down to 4th. Aston Martin appeals it, though, and they move him back to 3rd. So a very kind of chaotic end where he goes from 3 to 4 back to 3.
Yeah, and what bothered me about this is that George Russell actually got to stand on the podium for this when he didn't deserve it, and he was immediately not taken off of the podium per se, but in terms of the actual points towards the championship, he was removed from that podium spot, which is, that makes me feel a little bit better.
Someone just came and tackled him off the podium halfway through. It's been reversed.
Lawrence Stroll goes up there, just tackles him to the ground. Fernando Alonso is lifted by angels up to the 3rd spot on the podium.
Before we get to our 2024 predictions and then kind of the points implication that this has on the standings, I want to talk about the Jeddah Corniche Circuit for a second. I made this very clear all last season, a couple episodes we've done on the tracks. I don't know if it's by far, but this is my favorite race of the year. It's early, which is a little disappointing because it's like second race of the year is like the peak for me. But this track sets up some of the most chaotic, quick cutting camera shots that I've ever seen, where the drivers are going is it full throttle for like 80% of the time or something ridiculous? It's like the second most full throttle, or maybe the most full throttle on the F1 calendar. And again, everything is a turn, everything's a maneuver. And they actually changed the track last year for the first time. They removed the chicane that was in the middle half of the track between like turn 18 and 21. Somewhere there was a chicane and they got rid of it. So now it's even faster than it was before. And these drivers run it flat out. There's 2 hairpin turns. There's a lot of ducking and weaving through the track. I love it. What are some of your thoughts on the Corniche circuit?
First of all, it's got 27 turns, which is outrageous.
Yeah.
But regardless of that, this track just scares me. I mean, whenever you're looking at the diagram of this track, it looks like somebody took a rubber band and pulled it as tight as it can go. I mean, it's terrifying. You got a hairpin at turn 13, and then on the complete opposite side of the track, another hairpin, turn 27, as you're going towards the start finish. And the rest of it is just, if you gave a first grader a pencil and said, try and draw a straight line. I mean, it's bad. It's really bad. And, the thing about it is, if you're watching from previous seasons too, drivers struggle around here, not necessarily in the sense that they're tapping walls. That does happen too. But you'll see drivers completely cutting corners because they're just coming in way too hot. Like, especially if you're going to look, like, I mean, for example, turn 1, as it goes from turn 1 into turn 2, that whole section right there, drivers will come in steaming hot. Then you'll see some of that others of that play out around like 7, 8, 9. There's this big winding section as it goes into 10. I mean, there's sections of this track that if you're a driver, it should scare you, and rightfully so, because on top of all of this, on top of all of these curves, 27 different turns, 2 harsh hairpins, the walls are right next to you almost the entirety of the time, and you got to try and make overtakes. Man, this is ridiculous. I personally hate driving this track, but it's a spectacle to watch. There's no doubt about it.
It's the fact that it's, 26 turns? 27?
27.
27, but only maybe 4 of them you brake for? I'm guessing on that number, but like they're mostly full flat out turns.
One thing to be on the watch out for as we're watching the Grand Prix this year is I always like to make note of what the fastest lap of the previous race was, just to see, because you can kind of see development of the cars that way. The fastest lap of this track last year was Max Verstappen with a 1:31.906, and that was on the very last lap as he pits to get some fresh tires to grab that championship point. Why? Because if he didn't get that fastest lap, it would have gone to Sergio Perez, and he would have taken the lead in the championship. But Max was like, nah, I've got plenty of time between me and the car behind me. I'm just going to pit, grab these new tires, and we're going to go ahead and get this fastest lap, maintain my lead in the championship because I'm Max Verstappen.
What was say the fastest lap one more time?
It was a 1:31.
Interesting. So in 2022, it was a little bit faster, 1:31 at 6:34, and I wonder if that's because they removed that chicane.
It's possible. I mean, the reason why they moved it is because people were coming in hot, so I wouldn't be surprised if it slowed down the drivers ever so slightly. But get this, just for fun, you want to hear what the pole position lap was by Sergio Perez in qualifying?
Let me guess.
1:28.265. So again, you're looking at 1:31.9, which is basically 1:32, versus 1:28.2, which is dang near 1:28. So we're looking at like a 5-second gap there, or 4-second. That's insane.
Okay, I want to move into predictions for this year and then kind of look at how that'll affect the point standings overall. If you go on the odds sites, the prediction websites, whatever, the chalk is always going to be, and it's probably going to be for majority of the season, Verstappen, Perez, and Leclerc. Those are your widely accepted top 3.
Sure.
I'm going to agree with Verstappen at 1, just because it's Max Verstappen, and what are the odds he has some kind of qualifying issue like last year? Who knows? Probably low. So let's go Verstappen in the 1 spot. Give me Perez in the 2 spot, not because of the car, but because Perez is the king of the street circuits. And I think no matter what car he's in, he can pull out a podium finish. Give me for number 3. We're not going Ferraris. We're not going Mercedes. Give me Lando Norris in the 3 spot. I think that McLaren this year is built for speed. Previous years, last year especially, the early season McLaren struggled in turns. It was so bad in turns. This year, I think that thing's going to rip through this track like crazy. Its top speed is much better. Its flat out speed is much better this year, especially after the second half of last year. Give me Lando Norris in the 3.
Okay. I'm going to go a little bit different than yours. Actually, a lot of it, if I'm being completely honest. I'm completely mixing this up. Give me the king of the streets to take it number 1. Give him the 1 spot. Max Verstappen is quick, but I think that Sergio Perez is going to retain his title as king of the streets, take the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix victory. Give me Max in the 2nd spot. And at number 3, I've bet against this guy already once this season, and it was against my better judgment, and it's my fault. So give me Carlos Sainz to take that 3rd spot. He's just so quick. He's dynamic. And I just feel like he's going to kick Charles's butt this year. That's my personal opinion.
So why not Charles, though? Because I think everybody knows that watches us that we have kind of a preference to Carlos only because we see Charles as the golden boy. We really have nothing against Charles. It's just the perception that he's the Ferrari golden boy. Why in this race Carlos over Leclerc?
I think that Carlos has a chip on his shoulder. And even more than that, he's going to have that pushing him along, sure, and that's definitely going to play a part into it. But another thing that you got to remember is Charles Leclerc made his way up through the pack last season, got up behind Carlos Sainz, wasn't able to get around him, and Carlos took 6, Charles took 7. And now you add that with the fact that last race, granted, Charles had some problems with the car, but Carlos was quick, man, and Carlos took that spot over Charles again. So put the two together, give me that chip on the shoulder, and then give me Carlos Sainz in that 3rd spot.
And I still don't think we know if Charles's issues last week in Bahrain were a car issue or if it was a comfort level with the car issue. And
That's
if Carlos has a higher comfort level with that Ferrari, then he should finish ahead of Leclerc. Okay, looking at the point standings right now, obviously we have Red Bull in first with 44 points, followed by Ferrari with 27, Mercedes 16, and McLaren a very close 12. That McLaren-Mercedes battle all year is going to be pretty key. If my predictions work out, Lando getting a top 3 spot could give McLaren an edge over Mercedes, depending on where the other 3 drivers in that mix end up. I think we both have Red Bull obviously keeping their pretty substantial lead. I don't think that's going to change at all this season. And I'm not really saying that the Ferraris are going to do bad. There's a good chance one of the Ferraris gets the 3 spot, but just what I know about that McLaren car, it seems to be preferable. Here's where we get weird, because this is where we were weird last year. Last year, had Max Verstappen not gotten the fastest lap, who would have been in first place going into week 3?
Sergio.
Now, this year a little bit different, because Max got the fastest lap in the first race. If Sergio gets the win and the fastest lap, we've got a 2-way tie for first.
Yeah, that'll be sweet.
And with Carlos getting 3rd last week at Bahrain, if your prediction comes true, he's kind of firmly supplanting himself in that 3rd spot over everybody else. That's a huge points benefit over 4th and beyond.
Absolutely, because he'll end up with 30 points, and if Charles Leclerc, say he finishes 4th again, he'll only be at 24. That's a 6-point gap, and that's a lot to make up. I mean, it doesn't sound like a whole lot, but when you have the Red Bulls taking the 1 and the 2 spot, it is going to be a lot to make that up over the course of the season.
I'll tell you this, so I'm interested. Go ahead and start thinking about this. I want to know what your thoughts are somewhere else on the grid. So if you can pick a team that maybe struggled last week or struggled last year, I'm going to say I'm really interested to see what Oscar Piastri does this year. Last year, Piastri finished 15th, but he was in that garbage McLaren car. I want to see how this kid comes out and tears it up in a car that is actually a top 3, top 4 car. Can he get top 5 points? Can he really make a name for himself this early in the season and get up there in that points battle? I'd be interested to see where he finishes.
If I may be so bold, give me Alex Albon getting his first points of the season in Jeddah. Let me tell you why. 1, we saw great pace from Alex Albon, but 2, and more importantly, last season he had his braking problem. He was out of the Grand Prix. He was doing good at that moment. I want to see him come out and get points in Saudi Arabia, get on the board from the back markers to get points. And essentially, because of that, Williams is going to move up dramatically in these standings.
I'm also curious to see where the Alpines finish.
Give me 19th and 20th. Wait, somebody will crash. Give me 18th and 19th for the Alpines.
Give me Logan Sargent to crash.
Oh, you took my question at the end of the show. Dang it.
But give me Logan Sargent to crash. Now, he didn't crash last year in this race out of the many that he did crash in. But give me him to crash. So, yeah, give me the Alpines to go 18, 19. They're going to have a bad year. They are so far behind everybody else. Like, it's okay. Think about the past couple of years, how we thought about Haas and Williams, right? The true back markers.
Right.
They're below that.
Yeah, it's bad.
Because that level stayed the same. And they're below it. It's pretty rough. Elsewhere in the grid, I don't know. I mean, obviously, we'll see where the top 4 battle is. Can the AlphaTauris, man, can the RB team show improvement from Bahrain? We saw the RBs very close to points, right, last week in Bahrain. Can they improve on that? Can they get the points? We'll see the flat out speed of that RB, I think, in this race much more than we saw in Bahrain. So I'm curious to see how that plays out. Obviously, we're seeing a pretty good step up, I think, with one race of data and some testing from Zhou Guan Yu. So seeing how he comes out in this second race and competes in the really tight confines of Jeddah will also be pretty interesting. And no Nick DeVries this year. We get Danny Rick. So
yeah.
All right, guys. If you, well, you know what? I'll give you the funny question still. I don't want to steal that from you. Just let us know in the comments who your top 3 are going to be.
Guys, if you think that in the heat of the moment, in the heat of the passion, Esteban Ocon and Pierre Gasly slap into each other, boom, both of them out of the race. You hate to see it, but I think I'm right there with you.
All right, guys. We'll see you.
Bye, guys.